It was November 17th, 2025, around 2 p.m. at Wolf Chase Galleria Mall in Memphis, Tennessee. The shopping center was packed with people getting ready for Thanksgiving week, and inside Village Mart on the second level, 22-year-old Yahir Alejandro Mejia was shopping with his girlfriend, Tommy Hay. Tommy was 9 months pregnant, and the couple was browsing the store, seemingly minding their own business. But in less than 10 minutes, 3 shots would ring out on that mall floor, and Yahir would become a fugitive. You see, Yahir wasn't some regular man shopping with his pregnant girlfriend. Since at least 2023, Yahir had been in and out of the Memphis court system with over 10 separate charges. The charges included theft, drug possession, gun offenses, and evading arrest. But despite this lengthy list of charges, prosecutors had repeatedly declined to pursue cases. This meant Yahir had no actual convictions on his record. But things had escalated significantly in the months leading up to that day at Wolf Chase Galleria. In November 2024, almost exactly 1 year before this day, Yahir had been involved in an incident that resulted in serious felony charges. Those charges included theft of property valued between $10,000 and $60,000, evading arrest, drug possession, and multiple weapons charges. Then on October 30th, 2025, just weeks before he walked into that mall, a Shelby County grand jury had indicted him on 6 felonies from that November 2024 incident. He had been released on $20,000 bond, and he was a free man while awaiting trial on those serious charges. So when Yahir was shopping that afternoon with Tommy, he was technically out on bond for 6 pending felonies, including weapons charges, while walking around with a gun in his waistband. But then another man named Eric Sandoval walked into the store, accompanied by a friend named Julio Rivera. Eric and Yahir knew each other very well as they had been friends, but their relationship had fallen apart. Eric immediately approached Yahir, and they began to exchange words for roughly 30 seconds. In one of the surveillance videos, Yahir could be heard saying, "You and me, bruh," while Eric motioned for Yahir to follow him outside the store. Eric walked out first, with Yahir following closely behind. As soon as they got out of the store, Eric punched Yahir in the face for seemingly no reason, causing Yahir to stumble backwards. Julio, who had been standing nearby, simply walked away after the punch was thrown and never showed any aggressive behavior. And as for Yahir, he wasn't going to just stand by and take it, of course, but what he did next shocked everyone. He paused for 2 to 3 seconds before drawing out the gun from his waistband and fired 3 shots at Eric. Eric collapsed to the floor with gunshot wounds to his neck and chest as the bystanders scattered in different directions. Tommy, who had also gone outside to watch the entire confrontation unfold, immediately ran back inside the store screaming. And within the next few seconds, she and Yahir ran out of the store and got into their white SUV, fleeing the mall. Bystanders dialed 911 and emergency responders quickly flooded the scene. They rushed Eric to Regional 1 Health, where he was unfortunately pronounced dead. Meanwhile, Yahir drove to the nearby wooded area and tossed the gun into the woods, attempting to dispose of the murder weapon before heading straight to his apartment with Tommy to switch vehicles. By the time they get to their apartment, Yahir dropped Tommy off and headed out in the new vehicle to his mother's home near Chelsea Avenue in northeast Memphis. But on the way there, Yahir went live on Facebook, telling his viewers he was on his way to turn himself in.
Hey, look, I'm on the way to go turn myself in, bruh. Yeah, I'm on the way to go turn myself in.
He began to explain why he had no choice but to turn himself in, while repeatedly claiming that he fired in self-defense.
Self-defense, bro. Don't put your hands on me and think ain't gonna happen.
And then he made his case directly to anyone watching, saying that anyone who tried to put their hands on him, especially around his baby mama, should have expected him to react the way he did.
Do not put your hands on me, bro. Especially around my baby mama. Always.
He then ended the live stream asking people to free him.
Anyway, bro, free me, man. Love y'all, bro. Love who love me. Yeah.
Meanwhile, the Memphis Safe Task Force was already tracking Yahir's movements. They mobilized officers at his known addresses and his mother's residence to interview her about his whereabouts. And when Yahir arrived at his mother's residence in the 1700 block of Cum Street, he was immediately confronted by law enforcement. He attempted to run, leading to a brief foot chase, but was quickly captured and taken into custody. By the next day, November 18th, Yahir was charged with second-degree murder, a charge carrying a potential sentence of 15 to 60 years, and his bond was set at $500,000. But then on November 21st, Judge Taylor Batchelor revoked Yahir's bond from his prior case, those 6 pending felonies from the October 2025 indictment. This meant that even if Yahir somehow managed to post the $500,000 bond for the murder charge, he still couldn't walk free because the judge had pulled his release on the earlier charges. He was staying behind bars no matter what. Yahir also waived his bond hearing for the murder charge, which meant he would remain in custody without the possibility of getting out. As of February 2026, no public indictment had been announced, and Yahir remains in custody while the grand jury continued reviewing the case. And while those surveillance footage made it nearly impossible for Yahir to claim he had no choice but to pull that trigger, the man in the next case live-streamed his murderous rampage himself for the world to see in real time.
I can't lie, when I found out, I was scared. It's crazy. You cannot be safe in your own city.
It was September 7th, 2022, just before 1 a.m., when a group of friends gathered in a backyard on Lindale Avenue in Memphis, eating chicken and talking about business ideas. Dwayne Tunstall, a 24-year-old man, was excitedly talking about his plans for a food truck he wanted to call EBE, short for Everybody Eats. Dwayne was a father of one child, with another on the way, known in the community as a mentor to young people and always willing to help others. He renovated homes to improve neighborhoods and was working with his best friend Marcus to launch the food truck, which was supposed to serve as a community service initiative, offering free meals to homeless people. As Marcus put it,
you can eat, and if we all was to stand here in a circle, you wouldn't know who got the money.
the vibe that night was casual and normal until one of the friends, 19-year-old Ezekiel Kelly, started making strange comments about hurting someone. He told one of his friends, Mariko, that he was about to buck, which is street slang for taking someone's gun, and said, "Watch, just watch." This wasn't really surprising, as Ezekiel had a reputation for being a very violent kid. Ezekiel's childhood had also been rough from the start. Growing up in the Raleigh neighborhood of Memphis, which police identified as one of the city's most violent zip codes, he attended Coleman Elementary, but dropped out early, and by his teenage years, the streets had essentially raised him. His ex-girlfriend, Destin, who knew him since 5th grade, said Ezekiel felt unloved, unhelped, unseen, and that he'd been battling depression and loneliness for years, with no one close to him except his mother. He joined a gang called Spring Valley in middle school, influenced by his older brother and the need for belonging, and structure his home life never provided. His gang exposed him to ice, which is a street slang for crystal meth, and the drug use gradually became a constant in his life. By age 15, he had 6 delinquency charges on his record, and in 2018, he was convicted of aggravated robbery and placed in a hardware-secure facility, a lockdown juvenile detention center with fences, controlled access, and constant supervision, operated by the Tennessee Department of Children's Services. On several occasions, the court recommended corrective action to help rehabilitate him, including recommendations for counseling and substance treatment, all of which they never followed up on. The system had multiple chances to intervene, but nothing stuck. 6 months before that night, back in March 2022, Ezekiel had just been released from prison. He'd served only 11 months of a 3-year sentence for aggravated assault, stemming from a 2020 shootout on Willowwood Avenue in Fraser. He and 2 other people had stopped in a small white car and opened fire from the windows, shooting a 27-year-old man in the chest and a 13-year-old in the leg while they were helping a family move furniture out of a residence on Willowwood Avenue. Both victims required surgery, and Ezekiel, who was a teenager at the time, was transferred to adult court where he faced 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder. But in April 2021, he got a plea deal and only had to plead guilty to a reduced charge of aggravated assault. When he got out of prison in March 2022, he had nowhere stable to go, and his mother tried to relocate him from the violent North Memphis neighborhoods to East Memphis, hoping to get him away from the gang life and streets that had raised him. But that didn't work out, leaving Ezekiel virtually homeless and moving between different houses. Things would get progressively worse from there, as just a couple of months later, Ezekiel lost his older brother and his best friend to gang-related violence, 2 deaths that hit him back-to-back while he was already isolated and heavily using crystal meth. Destin said drugs had changed Ezekiel completely, turning him into a different person, as if she was dealing with 2 separate people. In the days right before September 7th, Ezekiel had been awake for 3 to 4 days straight, high on drugs, which only made his already fragile mental state worse. And now here he was, hanging out with his friends, who were unaware that he was about to embark on the biggest crash out of his life. After Ezekiel started tweaking out and making those weird comments, Mariko thought Ezekiel was just being weird or joking around, and even tried to calm him down by saying, "It's not worth it." But Ezekiel said, "Watch this," and pulled Dwayne aside to the driveway. He then suddenly pulled out a Glock 45 handgun modified to fire automatically and shot Dwayne in the head. The others ran to a car and tried to escape, but Ezekiel attempted to get in with them. They refused to let him in and drove off, and Ezekiel followed them in his Infiniti G37 sedan to another house. When he arrived, he casually informed them that Dwayne was dead, saying, "He gone, it is what it is." Then, in a surreal moment, he asked the terrified witnesses where he was supposed to go now, as if he hadn't just killed their friend. They told him to get away from them, and he drove off. Ezekiel then disappeared into the night, but he wasn't done yet, and nobody in the city had any idea what was coming. For the next 16 hours, there were no confirmed sightings or incidents involving Ezekiel in Memphis went about its day, unaware that the violence was far from over. Then at 4:35 p.m. of the same day, Ezekiel pulled up to a gas station on South Parkway East, where 62-year-old Richard Clark was sitting in his Toyota Camry. Richard was a retired correctional officer who had also worked as a campus safety officer at Christian Brothers University. He was the youngest of 7 siblings, known to his family as a quiet, humble man who would do anything for any one of us. Ezekiel drove up alongside Richard's car and fired multiple rounds through the window, ending Richard's life instantly before driving away. Just 1 minute later, at the intersection of Norris Road and Interstate 240, Ezekiel approached a woman and her father, who were fixing a flat tire, and asked them for directions to Whitehaven. The woman, 44-year-old Lakeisha McLaughlin, gave him directions, and instead of a thank you, Ezekiel responded by shooting her multiple times in the leg. She survived, but as Ezekiel sped off eastbound on Norris Road, she was left on the side of the highway with bullets in her leg. Her father, Willie, who witnessed the shooting, later said Ezekiel was demon-possessed after looking into his eyes, and then he made a decision that handed police exactly what they needed. Ezekiel started a Facebook livestream under the alias Zeke Huncho, where he was seen driving and rambling incoherently, confessing to Dwayne's murder from earlier that morning and mocking him as fake, which is street slang for a betrayer or disloyal person.
Check this out. I don't wag it on camera. I pull up and do this, man. I don't do it. What the say? No faking. No faking. Hear me? This for real.
The accusation appeared to be drug-fueled paranoia from Ezekiel, who had been awake on meth for days. Ezekiel was visibly high with foam at the mouth as he kept rapping and boasting about being a Crips gang hitman targeting snitches. As the live kept going on, Ezekiel could be seen firing drive-by shots at a random shop, though thankfully no one was hit. But then Ezekiel would reveal his actual plan, which was to die in a shootout with the police. At 5:50 p.m., Ezekiel pulled up to an AutoZone on Jackson Avenue, still streaming. He parked, walked inside with his phone still recording, and shot a man named Rudy Berger multiple times in the chest. Rudy was a complete stranger who was just shopping for car parts, and happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Oh, my mama, Kate, how you think I'm playing? Kate, I'm for show you this shit. This shit so real, man, guy. I'm getting
He screamed the words as he walked back to his car, leaving Rudy bleeding on the floor, while terrified customers and employees watched in horror. It was at this point that Ezekiel ended the livestream and drove off. At 5:56 p.m., police received a tip from Ezekiel's own mother and sister, who had seen the Facebook livestream and called to alert them that Ezekiel was threatening to harm civilians. Authorities immediately issued a citywide alert warning residents that Ezekiel was armed and dangerous. The University of Memphis went into lockdown, public transit stopped running, and a baseball game at the Auto Park Stadium was halted. At 7:21 p.m., Ezekiel crashed his Infiniti G37 on Poplar Avenue after turning in front of a truck, got out of the car, and started firing at nearby vehicles. He opened fire at a blue Honda Pilot, sending a bullet through Randall Graham's arm and grazing through the pants of another man, Matthew Carrazza. Randall quickly floored the gas and drove off. Ezekiel was still on foot, armed, and moving west down Poplar Avenue. At 7:53 p.m., Memphis officials issued a shelter-in-place order for the entire city, a directive telling every single resident to get inside, lock their doors, and stay there. It was the first time in Memphis history that the entire city had been told to stop moving, and the streets that had been full of people just hours earlier went completely silent. While that was going on, Ezekiel approached a gray Toyota CHR SUV with 38-year-old Allison Parker and her daughter inside. Allison was a medical assistant at the Family Practice Center in West Memphis, Arkansas, and had graduated from Arkansas State University Mid-South's Medical Assistant Program in 2012. Upon seeing Ezekiel approaching, Allison's daughter immediately exited from the passenger side and ran around to the driver's side, desperately trying to get her mother to leave the vehicle. But before Allison could make it out of the car, Ezekiel entered through the passenger side and shot her, causing her to fall out of the vehicle. Ezekiel maneuvered into the driver's seat of the SUV and drove away. By 8:52 p.m., Ezekiel was at a Raceway gas station in Mississippi, just across the state line on State Line Road West, where he pulled up next to 21-year-old Demetric Porter, who was pumping gas into his Dodge Challenger. Ezekiel asked Demetric for perks, also known as oxycodone, but Demetric recognized Ezekiel from the news alerts and ran to find a nearby police officer. Seeing an opening, Ezekiel immediately got into Demetric's Challenger and headed back into Tennessee. 5 minutes later, at 8:57 p.m., police spotted the stolen Challenger on Interstate 55 and began a high-speed chase. The pursuit would last for a while before coming to an end at Ivan Road and Hodge Road in Whitehaven, after Ezekiel suddenly crashed the vehicle. This was when the officers were eventually able to arrest him.
Oh, girl, they got him. There you go, right there. There you go, girl. There you go. I got the best seat in the house, and you do too.
The 20-hour rampage was finally over, with 3 people dead, 3 others wounded, and an entire city held hostage. But the legal process was only just beginning. Ezekiel pleaded not guilty at his first court hearing on October 4, 2022, facing 27 charges including 3 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, 5 counts of reckless endangerment with a deadly weapon, theft of property, evading arrest, and commission of an act of terrorism, which made him the first person in Tennessee history charged under this law. This set the stage for what would become a years-long legal battle. In March 2023, prosecutors announced they were seeking the death penalty, citing the random nature of the killings and Ezekiel's prior violent conviction as grounds. It took a while for the case to reach a conclusion, but on August 13, 2025, Ezekiel changed his plea to guilty on all 28 charges, taking the death penalty off the table and bringing the case to a close after 1,071 days. He was then sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus an additional 221 years, guaranteeing he would never see the outside of a prison again. Ezekiel will never walk free again, and Memphis will never forget the day one man's spiral turned a city into a war zone, just the same way we'll never forget the 6 Scorpion officers who rained hell on an unsuspecting man in the case that I'll be talking about next.
Watch out, watch out! Watch out! Oh! Oh!
On January 7, 2023, in Memphis, Tennessee, the clock had just passed 8:24 in the evening when 3 unmarked police vehicles boxed in a car from 3 sides on a quiet street corner near the Autumn Ridge neighborhood. Officers jumped out with guns already drawn, and within seconds the driver's door swung open, and a man was yanked out before he could even react. In the midst of the chaos, this man kept trying to defend himself, but nobody listened, and just 3 days later, he was dead. Before that night, Tyre Nichols was just a 29-year-old man living a quiet life in Memphis. He had moved to Memphis from Sacramento, California in February 2020 to get closer to his mother. There he moved in with her and his stepfather Rodney. Tyre was close to his mother in the way that showed up in small things like the tattoo of her name on his arm, the way he looked forward to her sesame chicken, and the way friends said he lit up whenever he talked about her. Tyre had a young son named Milo back in California, and that responsibility kept him focused and grounded. He picked up a job at FedEx, working second shift as a box assembler alongside his stepfather Rodney, who also worked there. He was so diligent in his job that his coworkers nicknamed him the box manager because of the easy, calm energy he brought to every shift. He also worked part-time at a Starbucks on the east side of Memphis. But Tyre's life had been far from glamorous. He had been living with Crohn's disease since his teenage years, an autoimmune condition that affected what he could eat and kept his frame thin, so much so that even though he was 6'3", he weighed only 145 pounds. Unfortunately, nobody who knew Tyre would have expected what was coming for him on that January night. The Scorpion unit had been running in Memphis for just over a year by the time they pulled Tyre over. The unit, which stood for Street Crimes Operation to Restore Peace in Our Neighborhoods, was launched in late 2021 by Police Chief Saralyn Davis in response to a violent crime surge that had left the city shaken, with Memphis recording 346 homicides in 2021 alone. Saralyn had run a similar aggressive unit years before in Atlanta called the Red Dog Unit, and Scorpion was built on the same blueprint. The unit had roughly 40 officers organized into 4 teams of 10, each focused on different crime types, including gang activity, auto theft, and general suppression. They worked in plainclothes, wore bulletproof vests marked with police, and operated out of unmarked vehicles so they could move through neighborhoods without being identified. In its first few months, Scorpion made 566 arrests and seized more than 250 weapons, and city leadership held that up as proof the unit was working. However, inside the neighborhoods where Scorpion operated, residents described officers jumping out of cars without warning, repeatedly detaining the same people, and having a very confrontational approach that left people afraid to walk outside. Many of the officers assigned to the unit were young and inexperienced, hired between 2017 and 2020, and the culture inside the unit reflected that. 2 of them, identified as officers Emmett Martin and Demetrius Haley, had already built a reputation within Scorpion for being 2 of the most aggressive members on the team, to the point where colleagues had nicknamed them the Smash Brothers. Emmett himself had earned the name Full Can after going through an entire can of pepper spray on a single person during a prior traffic stop. These were the officers now working the night shift on January 7th. So Officer Emmett, Demetrius, and some others were on the road that night, and the official reason they gave for stopping Tyre was that he was driving recklessly, swerving into oncoming traffic and nearly hit a police vehicle. However, no body camera footage captured any of that. In fact, one officer's own camera picked up a colleague saying Tyre had stopped at the red light and put his turn signal on. After stopping him, 3 of the officers, Demetrius, Emmett, and Preston Hemphill, surrounded Tyre's car with guns already drawn, and one of them shouted at him through the passenger window saying, before Demetrius wrenched the car's door open from the driver's side and pulled Tyre out by his arm. Tyre responded by saying he didn't do anything, but they shoved him to the ground anyway, and commands came from every direction at once, even though he was already on the ground.
You don't do that, okay? Get on the ground!
I'm on the ground. Turn around. On the ground. Yes, sir. Turn around. Please turn around. I think I tase you. Get on the ground.
Over the course of the encounter, officers would issue at least 71 commands, many of them physically impossible to follow at the same time, and Tyre kept responding with, before saying calmly,
Put your hands behind your back. Okay, I'm knock your ass. Hey, you guys are really doing a lot right now. Bro, lay down. I'm just trying to go home. Man, if you don't lay down, I am on the ground. Your stomach. I got you.
While officers held Tyre on the ground, Demetrius deployed pepper spray directly at him for seemingly no reason, hitting several of the other officers standing around him as well. In the confusion that followed, Tyre broke free and started running south on Ross Road. As he ran, Preston fired his taser at him in violation of department regulations, but Tyre kept moving as he headed straight for his mother's house, which was less than half a mile away.
9:30, we see him. We're on foot for southbound on Ross. Ross and Cascade Lane.
The officers kept chasing him for about 20 seconds.
Hey, give me a hand. Give me a hand. You might get sprayed again. Hey.
At 8:32 p.m., 8 minutes after the encounter, the officers finally caught up to Tyre around the corner of Castlegate Lane and Bear Creek Cove, about half a mile from where the stop had started. Tyre was pepper sprayed again the moment they reached him, and as he shielded his face with his hands, officers shouted,
Watch out, watch out! Watch out.
He was pushed to the ground, kicked in the head at least twice, punched in the face at least 5 times, and struck with the baton repeatedly, while other officers held his arms down. And through all of it, he did not swing back or resist.
Mom! Mom! Hey!
Give me your hands! Give me...
Okay, alright.
Give me your...
Tyre kept calling out for his mother over and over again, and she was 3 houses away from where he was, but to no avail. And 2 minutes later, around 8:34 p.m., Tyre was lying limp on the ground.
Give me a I'm a sissy, give me a hands! Watch out! I'm a baton the out you! He the is!
He kept slumping back to the ground, completely exhausted from the beatings. The officers held him to the ground as one of them climbed onto Tyre's back, fixing cuffs on his hands while completely suffocating him. And while that was going on, a second set of Scorpion officers, Tadarius Bean, Desmond Mills, and Justin Smith, had tracked Tyre down and joined in to subdue him.
Watch out! Watch out! Give it hands! Give us your hands! Give us your hands! Same location. Ross and Kelsey, Ross and Kelsey. What's it?
As soon as they had him secured in cuffs, the group of officers stood around and began to brag about the punches they had thrown. Some claimed Tyre had reached for a gun during the struggle, a claim the body cam footage directly contradicted, and not one of them called for medical help even though Tyre was severely injured. Memphis Fire Department medics arrived on scene 7 minutes later, around 8:41 p.m., but waited 16 to 19 more minutes before providing any meaningful care, partly because nobody on scene had told them what actually happened to Tyre. The dispatch log from that day described the whole thing as a chemical spray incident, and when one of the medics spoke to Preston at the first location, he was told that Tyre had only been tased and pepper sprayed, and that this was because he had run from officers. Eventually, an ambulance arrived. Nearly 20 minutes later, at 9:02 p.m., and Tyre was transported to St. Francis Hospital, where he was admitted in critical condition. That same night, once the supervisor on scene learned how serious Tyre's condition was, he instantly notified Internal Affairs and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. When officers went to Tyre's home to inform his family, his stepfather Rodney answered the door and asked what Tyre was being held for. The lieutenant on scene, apparently unsure himself, repeated what one of the officers had said, telling Rodney that Tyre was in custody for driving under the influence.
Oh, DUI. You doing? Well, we were just. Well, I'm here to try to. I'm trying to find out if you know him to take any kind of drugs or narcotics or anything.
When Tyre's family got to the hospital, Tyre was almost unrecognizable, and unfortunately, he couldn't hold on for too long. On January 10th, 2023, 3 days after the stop, Tyre died from blunt force trauma leading to brain injuries, internal hemorrhaging, and liver failure, a death which the medical examiner ruled as a homicide. His family immediately began demanding answers, and pushing for the body camera footage to be released to the public. In response to the pressure from the family, the Memphis Police Department conducted an internal review, and what they found in that footage was damning enough that all 5 officers involved that night were fired on January 20th for violating multiple department policies, including excessive use of force, duty to intervene, and duty to render aid. 6 days later, on January 26th, they were indicted on state charges including second-degree murder. Later on January 28th, the footage was released to the world, and the Scorpion unit was permanently disbanded the same day. Within hours of the footage hitting the internet, protests had broken out in Memphis, New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, where people blocked highways and demanded that the officers responsible face the most severe punishment possible. The senior EMT on scene that night was a man named Jamichael Sandridge, who carried the highest level of medical authority on the call, and whose decisions shaped how the entire response unfolded. Both Jamichael and his partner Robert were fired from the Memphis Fire Department on January 30th and had their EMT licenses immediately suspended by the Tennessee Emergency Medical Services Board. Jamichael faced the harshest outcome of the two. In March 2025, following a 2-day hearing in Nashville, the state's EMS board revoked his license entirely, finding that he had failed to provide any emergency care skills for approximately 16 to 19 minutes while Tyre lay dying against that patrol car. However, neither of the two men was ever criminally charged. Knowing that Tyre was less than half a mile away, calling for his mom will haunt Tyre's mother for the rest of her life, in the same way the brother of the man in the next case will remember the last moment together as one riddled with gunshots and bullet holes. There was nothing unusual about Adolph Thornton Jr., who the music world knew as Young Dolph, stopping at Makita's homemade butter cookies on a Tuesday afternoon. He had been coming to the small bakery on Airways Boulevard for years, and on November 17, 2021, he pulled up the same way he always did, alone and unbothered, to pick up cookies for his mother. He had grown up poor in Castalia Heights neighborhood, one of Memphis's hardest neighborhoods, built one of the most successful independent rap careers in the country without signing to a single major label, and spent years pouring money back into his community. Dolph was 36 years old, a father of 2, and by every measure, a man who had beaten the odds. But none of that mattered to the two men sitting in a stolen white Mercedes a few blocks away, waiting for exactly this moment. But before we dive deeper into this ambush, let's go back to where it all began. It started many years earlier in 2014, when Yo Gotti, born Mario Mims, one of Memphis's most successful rap figures and the founder of Collective Music Group, also known as CMG, reached out to young Dolph about joining his label. At that point, Dolph had already been grinding for years on his own. Dolph had founded his record label, Paper Route Empire, in 2010 after releasing his debut mixtape without the help of any record label in 2008. He printed thousands of CDs himself, paying to open shows for other artists, and building a fan base the hard way. So when Gotti tried to bring Dolph under his wings, Dolph decided that he had invested too much of his own money and time to hand the keys to someone else. Dolph turned Gotti down, and the way he described that first meeting years later made it clear the rejection was about more than just business.
Man tell me, he sent everybody out the studio, like, let me holler at dog. Like, man, you got your own everything, bro. You popping, you like, bro, you got the money, you got your team, you got this, you got that. You like, bro, I'm telling you, we can.
Gotti had thrown his own artists under the bus just to close a deal.
So it's like a red alert the first time I met him.
Gotti kept trying though. He texted Dolph consistently for 2 years after that first meeting, checking in, proposing collaborations, trying to keep the door open.
Yo Gotti was texting my phone for 2 years straight. What you doing, bro? What you working on, bro? Let's do this. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's do that. Like, it's cool, it's cool.
But Dolph was not interested, and the silence between the two men grew heavier with every passing year. Then came February 2016. Dolph released an album called King of Memphis, and he dropped it on the exact same day Gotti dropped his own project, The Art of the Hustle. The title alone read as a direct challenge to Gotti, who had long considered himself the king of that city. Gotti's album debuted at number 4 on the Billboard 200. Dolph came in at number 49, but the message had landed all the same, and people around Gotti were not happy about it. That same month, a rapper signed to CMG, Black Youngsta, whose real name is Semi Benson, showed up to Dolph's neighborhood with a group of men, guns visible, and shot a video there. Black Youngsta then released a diss track called Shake Some, aimed squarely at Dolph. He said,
"But Dolph don't wanna play. I'm on tour with the K. Mac 11 Smith & Wesson extended clip, 100 rounds on a Draco. How the you the king of Memphis? You ain't from the city, you from Chicago. Boy, you better lay low. Killers move when I say so."
Dolph fired back on Instagram, accusing Gotti directly of sending others to do his dirty work because he would not handle things himself. However, Dolph didn't stop there, as his official answer came in February 2017 when he dropped another diss track called Play With Yo In the song, Dolph called Gotti by name, mocked his brother Big Jook, claimed he had been intimate with Gotti's baby mama, and shot a music video featuring a Gotti lookalike. It was one of the most brutal diss tracks Memphis had ever heard. On February 26, 2017, the day after Dolph released the music video for the song, he was in Charlotte, North Carolina for a performance during the CIAA college basketball tournament. Right on North Caldwell Street, just a few blocks from where the championship game was about to tip off, a group of gunmen opened fire on Dolph's SUV with over 100 rounds. Bullets tore through multiple cars, nearby buildings, and homes in the area, nearly hitting people inside. The only reason Dolph walked away was that he had spent $300,000 armoring his SUV with bulletproof panels. He climbed out of that truck without a scratch, went to the venue, and performed that same diss track in front of a packed crowd like nothing had happened. 3 months later, investigators traced the van connected to the shooting back to Black Youngsta. Black Youngsta, along with 2 other men named Frederick Black and Antavius Gardner, then turned themselves into Charlotte authorities in May 2017. All 3 were charged with 6 counts of discharging a weapon into occupied property and felony conspiracy. But when the case went before prosecutors, the charges fell apart. The only evidence tying Black Youngsta to the shooting was the rented van, but unfortunately, there was nothing placing him inside it or even at the scene when the shots were fired. 7 months later, in September 2017, things got significantly worse. Dolph was outside the Lowe's Hotel in Hollywood, California, when 3 men approached him in the valet parking area. An argument broke out among them, quickly escalating into a physical fight. Dolph was knocked to the ground, and one of the men pulled out a handgun and opened fire. Dolph was shot multiple times in his torso, with at least 1 bullet wounding him, causing him to flee to a nearby shoe store. He was rushed to hospital in critical condition and spent 2 weeks recovering before he was well enough to leave. Gotti happened to be staying in that same hotel with his entourage, and coincidentally, both his crew and Dolph's crew had gotten into a disagreement shortly before the shots were fired. Because of this, Gotti was named a person of interest by the LAPD, but was ultimately cleared. A Memphis man named Corey McClendon was arrested near the scene on suspicion of attempted murder, though it remained unclear whether he was the one who pulled the trigger. But just like with the past incidents, the charges against him also did not stick. But even though Dolph survived again, the tension that had been building for 3 years was nowhere close to being finished. By November 2021, 4 years had passed since those shootings. Dolph had kept releasing music, kept giving back to Memphis, and kept moving without letting the danger change how he lived. He came back home that month for 2 reasons: to visit his aunt who was battling cancer, and to give away Thanksgiving turkeys, something he had done every single year since 2015 for his community. He moved around the city the way he always did in Memphis, without a security detail, or the kind of caution you might expect from a man who had survived multiple attempts on his life. But somewhere across the city, 3 men were quietly preparing to change that. Big Juke was Gotti's older brother and a well-known Memphis figure with deep ties to the streets. He was the one carrying the deepest grudge over Play With Yo and placed a $100,000 bounty on young Dolph's head. But Big Juke was not going to find the shooters himself. That is where Hernandez Govan came in. Hernandez was a 45-year-old Memphis local who moved in the same circles, and he had been tapped as the middleman, the person who would find the right people, connect them to the job, and manage the payment. He had already been in communication with 2 men he believed could handle it. One was Cornelius Smith, a 36-year-old with a violent criminal history who had developed a serious drug habit after losing his young son in 2020 and desperately needed money. The other was Justin Johnson, a 23-year-old aspiring rapper who went by Straight Drop and dreamed of landing a deal with CMG. So when they found out that Dolph was back in Memphis and moving around without security, they realized they had an opportunity to strike. Early on November 17th, around 3:16 a.m., surveillance cameras at a Valero gas station near Crosstown Concourse captured Justin and Cornelius arriving in an Infiniti car and then hopped into a stolen white Mercedes-Benz that had been parked there waiting for them. The Mercedes had been carjacked from a 22-year-old woman at a gas station in East Memphis 7 days earlier and had been quietly stashed until it was needed. They left their original vehicle behind and drove off in the Mercedes. From that point on, they were untraceable, or so they thought. Earlier that same evening, they had located Dolph near a gas station, but arrived too late. At 10:49 that morning, cameras at Crosstown Concourse caught Justin leaving his apartment building with his young daughter, dressed in a black hoodie, gray sweatpants, and a Bass Pro Shops hat. He walked to the garage and drove off in the stolen Mercedes. He then picked up Cornelius, and the 2 of them headed toward the area where Dolph's turkey giveaway was taking place. They were not specifically hunting for Dolph that morning. Instead, they were looking for anyone connected to the Paper Route empire. But then, while parked outside a cookie shop on Airways Boulevard, they spotted a camouflage Corvette they recognized as Dolph's, and that was all it took. At 12:21 p.m., the Mercedes pulled up outside Makita's Cookies. Both men stepped out, faces covered, and opened fire through the shop window. The attack lasted under 1 minute. Dolph's brother Marcus, who was at the scene, fired back at the 2 men, hitting Cornelius in the shoulder, arm, and leg. Despite the wounds, both men made it back to the Mercedes and drove away. They drove to a relative's apartment, cleaned their wounds, changed their clothes, and split into separate vehicles before abandoning the Mercedes on Bradley Street near Hernandez's home in Orange Mound. Back at Makita Maquitas, Memphis Fire Department personnel arrived within minutes of the shooting and found Dolph on the floor with multiple gunshot wounds. But sadly, there was nothing they could do as he was pronounced dead at the scene. Within 24 hours of the shooting, Memphis police released surveillance images of the suspects and details about the stolen white Mercedes to the public, and then tips started coming in almost immediately. On January 5, 2022, investigators announced a $15,000 reward through Crime Stoppers, a program that allows members of the public to submit anonymous tips about crimes in exchange for potential cash rewards. That announcement alone generated over 500 leads and became the turning point in the investigation. It started with the abandoned Mercedes. 3 days after the murder, on November 20th, a tipster called in the location of a white Mercedes parked behind an abandoned house on Bradley Street in Orange Mound. The car had damage on the right side that matched what surveillance footage had captured at Maquitas. Investigators ran the plates and confirmed it was the same vehicle that had been carjacked from the 22-year-old woman at a gas station off Kirby Road on November 10th, exactly 1 week before the murder. When forensic teams processed the Mercedes, they pulled fingerprints from inside the car belonging to Cornelius and 2 other men. That was the thread that unraveled everything. Cornelius was arrested on December 9, 2021 in South Haven, Mississippi, on an auto theft warrant connected to the stolen Mercedes. His fingerprints inside the carjacked vehicle were enough to bring him in. By the time he was extradited to Shelby County and booked into jail, a grand jury had already indicted him on first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, convicted felon in possession of a firearm, and employment of a firearm in the commission of a dangerous felony. He was held without bond, but investigators still needed the second shooter. That is where the surveillance footage became critical. Detectives had spent weeks stitching together a video timeline, tracing a figure in a black hoodie, gray sweatpants, and a Bass Pro hat from Justin's apartment across Crosstown Concourse all the way to Maquitas and back. So on January 5th, 2022, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation officially named Justin as a wanted fugitive, releasing his photo publicly and warning that he should be considered armed and dangerous. Tips came in even faster this time, and 6 days later, on January 11th, U.S. Marshals tracked him to a truck stop in Brazil, Indiana. He was taken into custody without incident and brought back to Memphis in handcuffs. Hernandez, the middleman who prosecutors said connected the shooters to the hit, was indicted in May 2022, once investigators had built enough of the financial and communications trail to charge him to court. On September 26, 2024, the jury found Justin guilty on every single count, and he was sentenced to life without parole. And then on November 1st, they added another 50 years for the conspiracy and firearm charges. Hernandez went to trial in July 2025, nearly 4 years after the shooting, and by then, Justin was already serving life in prison. On August 21st, 2025, after just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury came back and found Hernandez not guilty on all charge, as the prosecution couldn't find enough evidence to prove that he set the murder up. Cornelius reached a plea deal on February 12th, 2026, with a final hearing rescheduled to March 30th to determine the specifics of his sentence and where he would serve it. The terms of the deal have not been made fully public, but what is clear is that the man who pulled the trigger, the man who organized the hit, and the man who allegedly paid for it all ended up with very different outcomes. One is serving life plus 50 years, one walked free, and one is buried in Memphis.